Let me ask you something unusual. When was the last time a woman looked at you and relaxed? Not smiled. Not laughed at a joke you made? Not responded to a compliment you gave her? Relaxed like her shoulders dropped half an inch? Like something in her chest softened? Like without knowing exactly why she felt safer being near you than she did 2 minutes ago? If you can't remember a specific moment like that, or if you're not even sure what I mean by it, then what I am about to share with you is probably the most important thing you'll watch this week. And here's what's strange about this. The gesture I'm going to describe isn't a line. It's not a routine. It's not a technique you practice in front of a mirror. It won't be found in any pickup manual. Most men who hear it will think that's too simple. And they'll keep doing what they're doing, and they'll keep getting the same results they've been getting. But a small percentage of men, and I mean genuinely small, maybe 5 or 10%, will hear what I'm about to say, and something will click. Not because they're smarter, because they're ready to stop performing and start connecting. Those are the men women remember years later and can't fully explain why. Stay with me because this goes deeper than you think. Here's what this video is actually about. It's not about seduction in the way most people think about it. It's not about becoming some kind of idealized, polished version of yourself that women can't resist. That kind of thinking and the performance mindset is exactly what creates the invisible wall between you and genuine connection with a woman. What I want to show you today is rooted in psychology, specifically in how the female nervous system processes emotional safety, attraction, and trust, and why those three things are far more interconnected than most men have ever been told. There's a particular gesture, and I'm using that word broadly because it's less of a physical action and more of a way of being present that triggers something deep and primal in a woman's psychology. When she experiences it, she doesn't think, oh, he did that thing. She just feels differently about you. She feels seen. She feels steady. She feels often for the first time in a long time, like she doesn't have to manage the dynamic between you. And that feeling, that is the beginning of real attraction. Not physical attraction alone, but the kind of attraction that makes a woman genuinely want to be around you. That makes her think about you when you're not in the room. That makes her bring you up to her friends. What I'll give you today are three psychological principles that explain why this works. Each one builds on the last. And the third one, I'll be upfront, is the one that most men actively avoid, which is exactly why it's the most powerful. No hype, no exaggeration, just an honest look at what's actually happening beneath the surface of attraction. Let's get into it. Before we get to what works, I want to be honest with you about what doesn't. Because chances are you've been given a version of this advice before. Maybe it sounded something like, be confident, be a challenge, be high value, show her you don't need her approval. And look, and there's something real in all of those ideas, but the way most men implement them, it backfires quietly, invisibly, and they never understand why. Here's the problem. Most men approach attraction as a performance. You perform confidence. You perform indifference. You perform success or humor or leadership. And you do it because somewhere along the way, you got the message that women respond to what you project. So you project hard constantly and it exhausts you and it confuses her because she can feel, even if she can't name it, the difference between a man who is something and a man who is trying to appear as something. Women are extraordinarily good at this. Not because they're trying to catch you out, but because their nervous systems have been calibrated through millions of years of evolution to detect authenticity. They needed to know, is this man safe? Is he real? Can I trust what I'm seeing? Because historically, the cost of getting that wrong was catastrophic. So when you perform, even skillfully, she detects it. Not consciously always, but something in her pulls back. Something in her stays guarded. And you feel it as she's playing games or she's hot and cold or I can't figure her out. But often what's actually happening is that her nervous system hasn't been given enough real signal to relax. Now let's look at the other common mistake, the opposite of performance. Some men realizing that the performance isn't working shift to pure transparency. They over-communicate. They over-explain their feelings. They make themselves completely constantly available. They remove all mystery, all tension, all space. And they call this being real. And women appreciate honesty. But there's a difference between being emotionally real and emotionally flooding someone. When a man leads with his emotional need, when his openness is driven by anxiety rather than security, it doesn't create intimacy, it creates pressure. And women instinctively step back from pressure. So you've got men on one extreme performing strength they don't feel, and men on the other extreme oversharing vulnerability in a way that feels like a request to be emotionally managed. And in the middle, this quiet, powerful, almost invisible space is where the men who are genuinely magnetic live. What are they doing differently? Three things, and we're going to go through all of them. Three psychological triggers. Trigger one, the power of unhurried attention. Here's something that most men fundamentally misunderstand about what women find attractive. They think women are attracted to what a man pays attention to: his career, his goals, his passions, his life, and those things matter. But what creates emotional pull? What creates the thing that makes her feel chosen in a way that goes beneath the surface is not what you pay attention to, it's how you pay attention. Specifically, do you pay attention to her without agenda? Let me explain what I mean by that. Most men, when they're interested in a woman, pay attention to her in a way that is subtly goal oriented. They listen to find the right thing to say next. They notice her because they're looking for signs she's interested. They ask questions, but while she's answering, they're thinking about how to respond. Their attention is moving through her toward an outcome. She feels this even when she can't name it. What she rarely experiences and what creates an almost immediate emotional shift when she does is a man whose attention actually lands on her, who listens not to respond but to understand, who looks at her not to assess her interest but because he finds her genuinely worth looking at. This is what I mean by unhurried attention. It has a particular quality. It's not intense or laser focused in a way that feels like pressure. It's spacious. It's calm. It communicates without a single word. I'm not in a rush. I'm not anxious about where this goes. I'm just here with you right now. Psychologically, this activates what researchers call the social engagement system, the part of the nervous system that governs trust, openness, and connection. When a woman's social engagement system is activated, she naturally opens up. She talks more. She laughs more freely. She moves closer. Physically and emotionally, not because she made a decision to do those things, but because her nervous system has received a signal that it's safe to do so. And here's the part that challenges a common belief. Most men think that to be attractive, they need to be doing something impressive, saying something clever, moving the interaction forward. But some of the most profoundly attractive moments a man can create require him to do less, not more, to stop pushing and simply be present. Try this next time you're in a conversation with a woman you're interested in. Actually, stop thinking about the next thing you're going to say. Let whatever she's saying actually reach you. Let there be a moment of genuine pause before you respond. Not because you're playing it cool, but because what she said was worth thinking about. That pause, that two-conned silence where she can see you actually processing her words, communicates more about your emotional intelligence than any line you could deliver. Women remember men who made them feel heard, not men who said impressive things. Trigger two, the frame that doesn't need her approval. The second principle is one that men intellectually understand but emotionally struggle to embody, and that's this. A truly attractive man has a frame, a way of experiencing himself and his life that does not require her to validate it. Now, before you think I'm just repackaging the "don't care what she thinks" advice that gets thrown around everywhere, let me draw a distinction that actually matters. There's a difference between a man who doesn't care about her opinion because he's emotionally shut down or dismissive, and a man who doesn't need her opinion to feel secure in himself. One is coldness, the other is what we might call self-containment, and they feel completely different to a woman. A dismissive man makes her feel unimportant. An emotionally self-contained man makes her feel safe. Here's why. When a man constantly seeks approval from a woman, when he adjusts his opinions based on her reactions, when he gets subtly anxious when she doesn't respond enthusiastically, when his mood is visibly determined by where she's at, something happens in her psychology. She starts to feel responsible for him, and responsibility kills attraction. Not because women are cold-hearted, but because being someone's emotional anchor is exhausting, and it signals that he hasn't done the inner work of becoming his own anchor. The man with a solid internal frame is different. He has opinions he holds with lightness, willing to hear her perspective, genuinely curious about how she sees things, but not destabilized by disagreement. He has a life that doesn't halt the moment she shows up in it. He has a direction he's moving in that existed before her and will continue after any conversation they have. This doesn't mean he's unavailable. This doesn't mean he's aloof. It actually means the opposite. Because when a man isn't seeking approval, he can be fully present with her without an agenda. He can be curious about her without needing her to meet some emotional need he has. He can be warm without being grasping. And that combination, warmth without grasping, is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily attractive. Let me give you a subtle, real world example of how this shows up. A woman tests, and I use that word descriptively, not critically, a man's frame almost automatically, not usually consciously. She might say something mildly provocative, disagree with something he said, or simply give a lukewarm response to something he shared. And the question her nervous system is asking in that moment, without her necessarily knowing it is, does he fold? Does he get defensive? Or does he stay steady? A man who folds, who immediately over-explains himself, walks back his opinion, or ramps up his effort to get her re-engaged, signals that his self-worth is contingent on her approval. And she feels that as instability. A man who stays steady, who might smile, acknowledge the difference in perspective, hold his ground with zero aggression, signals something else entirely. He signals that he knows who he is, regardless of whether she affirms it in this moment. In that steadiness, that is one of the most quietly attractive things a man can communicate. Not because women like difficult men, but because a man who is solid in himself communicates that he'll be solid with her, that she won't have to carefully manage his ego, that she can actually relax. There it is again, that word relax. We're going to come back to that in the third trigger because that's where all of this comes together. Trigger 3, the gesture itself, creating emotional safety without losing your edge. This is the one. This is the principle that most men hear, nod at, think they understand, and then never actually embody because it requires something that is deeply counterintuitive for men who have been told that strength means self-reliance, that attraction means power, and that vulnerability is a liability. The gesture, and I want you to really sit with this, is the act of making it safe for her to be fully herself. Not making her feel comfortable by agreeing with everything she says. Not making her feel comfortable by removing all tension. Not performing warmth or sensitivity. I mean something more specific. I mean behaving in ways that consistently communicate you will not be judged here. You will not be managed here. You will not have to perform for me. I'm not easily shocked, not easily threatened, and not looking for a version of you that fits some ideal in my head. I'm curious about the actual you. This is the gesture, and it's not a single action. It's a posture, a way of holding yourself in the presence of a woman that makes the air between you feel different. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. It looks like not flinching when she says something unexpected. She says something self-deprecating, or shares an opinion you didn't anticipate, or admits something slightly embarrassing, and instead of rushing to fill the silence with reassurance or recoiling, or offering unsolicited advice, you just receive it with steadiness, maybe a quiet acknowledgement, maybe just a look that says, "Nah, that's fine. You're fine. I can handle you." It looks like asking questions that go one layer deeper than the surface. Not what do you do for work, but what made you choose that? Not how was your weekend, but you seem like you're actually tired, not just physically. What's on your mind? That kind of question only works if it comes from genuine curiosity. If it comes from a tactic, she'll feel the hollowness of it. But if it comes from actually being interested in the interior life of the person sitting across from you, it opens something. It looks like being comfortable with silence. This is huge, and almost no one talks about it. Most men treat silence as a problem to be solved. They rush to fill it with something clever or funny or interesting. But a man who is comfortable with silence, who can sit in a moment of quiet with a woman and not feel the need to perform, communicates an extraordinary level of inner security. And she relaxes into it, because silence in the presence of a secure person doesn't feel like awkwardness. It feels like rest. Now, here's where this connects to what I said earlier about not losing your edge. Because some men here make her feel emotionally safe, and they translate that into be soft, be gentle, remove anything that creates tension or challenge. But that's a misunderstanding, and it actually reduces attraction. Emotional safety is not the absence of tension, it's the presence of trustworthiness within tension. It's a woman knowing that when things get slightly difficult or uncomfortable, you're not going to collapse, disappear, or lash out. You're going to stay grounded, present, honest. A man can hold a woman's emotional world with care and be direct and have standards and push back on things he disagrees with and take up space unapologetically. In fact, he almost has to do all of those things because emotional safety in the absence of masculine presence just feels like blandness. And blandness doesn't create attraction. What you're building is something paradoxical, a space where she can be fully herself, unguarded, unperforming, real. And she's in the presence of a man who is fully himself, who has edges, who is going somewhere, who isn't adjusting himself to fit her comfort. That combination is almost vanishingly rare. A man who is both grounding and interesting, both safe and compelling, both present and purposeful. When a woman experiences that, even briefly, she doesn't forget it. Psychologically, what's happening is a simultaneous activation of two systems: the safety system, which determines whether she can lower her guard, and the arousal system, which determines whether she finds the interaction stimulating and alive. Most men activate one or the other. The gesture I'm describing activates both at the same time. That's not magic. That's just how human psychology works when a man has done enough internal work to be both secure and genuine at the same time. Let's talk about what that actually requires. I want to be straightforward with you about something. Everything I've described, the unhurried attention, the self contained frame, the capacity to hold emotional space, these are not techniques you layer on top of an unchanged interior. They're expressions of an interior that has actually done some work. You can't fake genuine curiosity. You can't manufacture the steadiness that comes from actually knowing who you are. You can't perform emotional availability with any real depth if you're actually somewhere else internally. So, the practical application here is both simpler and more demanding than most advice you'll find on this topic. It starts with noticing, just noticing. When you're in a conversation with a woman or anyone, how much of your attention is actually on her and how much of it is on your own running internal commentary? How much are you listening and how much are you rehearsing? How often do you feel a subtle current of anxiety about how the interaction is going? And how does that anxiety affect your behavior? Most men, when they honestly observe themselves in this way, realize that a significant portion of what they call being present is actually a very sophisticated form of self monitoring. You're watching yourself, assessing yourself, hoping you're coming across right. And that self monitoring, however subtle, creates a slight distance between you and the person you're with. The work is in closing that distance, not by thinking about it more, but by becoming secure enough in yourself that the monitoring becomes unnecessary. And how do you become more secure in yourself? That's a longer conversation, but the short version is this: men who have a genuine sense of direction in their life, who know what they value, what they're building, what they're not willing to compromise, have a natural groundedness that doesn't require effort to perform. It just exists, and women feel it immediately. So, the most practical advice I can give you is not a line or a move. It's this: build a life that you're actually invested in. Develop a sense of self that isn't contingent on how any particular interaction goes. Get curious, genuinely curious about the interior lives of the women you spend time with. And practice being still. Practice letting pauses breathe. Practice receiving what someone says without immediately needing to fix it, redirect it, or respond to it. These things are simple to describe and genuinely difficult to do consistently, but they compound. Every conversation where you manage to actually listen changes something slightly. Every moment where you hold your frame without defensiveness builds something. Every time you create a bit of real emotional space and someone fills it honestly, that's data your nervous system incorporates. You're not trying to become an idealized version of yourself. You're trying to become a more grounded, more present, more genuinely curious version of who you already are. That man, That version of you doesn't need tricks because the gesture at its core is simply this: seeing someone clearly without needing them to be anything other than what they are while remaining fully and unapologetically yourself. That's it. That's the whole thing. And almost nobody does it. I want to leave you with a broader thought before we close. There's a reason this kind of content, genuine connection, emotional intelligence, real presence, doesn't get as much traffic as the promise of some secret phrase that changes everything overnight. Because the thing that creates real lasting attraction in a woman's mind isn't available as a shortcut. And we live in a world that's addicted to shortcuts. But here's what I know to be true. Based on psychology, based on human behavior, based on the patterns that repeat themselves across cultures and generations, women, like all human beings, are drawn to authenticity the way plants are drawn to light. Not performed authenticity, which is just a more sophisticated performance. Actual authenticity, the kind that can only come from a man who has stopped performing and started being. When a woman encounters a man like that, especially if she spent significant time around men who are performing, the contrast is immediate and profound. She doesn't even have to consciously process it. Her nervous system processes it for her. And the result is that thing I described at the very beginning of this video. She relaxes. And that relaxation, that softening, that lowering of the guard she carries everywhere is not weakness on her part. It's trust. It's one of the most meaningful things one human being can offer another. And the fact that you were the one who created the conditions for it to happen, that's not manipulation. That's genuine masculine value. That's what it actually means to be the kind of man who creates positive change in someone's emotional world just by showing up fully. That's what these three triggers are pointing toward, not tactics, a way of being. If any of this landed for you, if something in what I described resonated with something you've been feeling, but haven't had the language for, I'd encourage you to sit with it before you try to do anything with it. The instinct is to immediately try to apply it, to take the ideas into your next conversation and see if they work. And some of that is fine. But the deeper shift happens when you stop trying to use these principles and start simply asking yourself, who am I becoming? Am I becoming a man whose presence is actually steady? Am I becoming more curious about people or less? Am I building something I actually care about? Or am I still organizing my energy around getting a particular reaction from women? Those questions, if you sit with them honestly, will take you further than any technique I could ever offer. If you want to go deeper on any of the psychological principles I touched on today, the neuroscience of attachment, the way emotional safety interacts with desire, the internal work of building genuine frame, I've covered all of that in detail in other videos on this channel. The links are in the description. And if you're watching this and you know someone who needs to hear it, not in a condescending way, just someone you think is genuinely trying to figure this out, share it with them. Not everyone is ready for this kind of conversation, but some men are. And for those men, one video at a time, the shift starts to happen. Let me leave you with this. Attraction is not a performance review. It's not something she scores you on based on how clever your opening line was or how confidently you held eye contact for exactly the right number of seconds. It's an emotional experience, and emotional experiences follow their own logic. A logic that has nothing to do with looking impressive and everything to do with being real. The men who understand this, who stop auditioning for approval and start showing up as themselves, grounded and present and genuinely curious, stop chasing attraction. They start generating it naturally without force because the most manly gesture in any room is not the loudest or the most impressive. It's the one that makes the person next to you feel like they don't have to pretend. Most people will never offer that. You can. If this gave you something to think about, leave a comment below. I read them all. Tell me which of the three principles hit closest to home. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. More of this coming. I'll see you in the next